All right, hands of the week. So we're playing 100, 200, 400 with a $200 big blind ante.
Bill Klein versus Brian Kim. So a very strong, long-time high-stakes pro, and Brian Kim.
And Brian raises up the cutoff here to 1,000, so 2.5x open. You like the size? Would you be going smaller, bigger, somewhere in between?
There's nothing wrong with that size, but I think when players are over-defending and under 3-betting, well, that's the time to be larger sizes and a slightly wider range.
Yeah, if this was a spot where Brian had 2 or 3 aggressive pros in the blinds, that would be a spot where you want to size down because you're going to be getting 3-bet all the time.
Right.
But in this particular scenario, when you do have some recreational players in the blinds, probably just want to size up because they call too much and 3-bet too little. Bill does call from the straddle, and we go to a flop, which is 10-5-4 with 2 hearts, the 5 and 4 of hearts. Bill checks, and now it is over to us in Brian's shoes. What are you thinking in terms of sizing here on this flop versus Bill?
Well, I think that Bill is likely going to under-raise and overfloat on this board. So when I have thick value and I'm not blocking the 10x, I think that there's a real argument for using a larger size.
So like if Bill is raising here with a hand like ace 10 or queen 10, or if he's raising here with a hand like 6-7 or ace x of hearts, if we bet small, in that case betting small is pretty good because we capture the wider, weaker portion of his range. Maybe he'll just float us with ace high here if we bet small, and then he'll raise off his stronger hands. But if he's under check raising, choosing that bigger size makes a lot more sense because, as you say, we kind of got to put the money in for them. So Brian goes
1,600, I think.
You've really got this one down, huh?
Yeah, I watched it.
Brian 1,600, Bill with a very quick call.
Do you want to talk a little bit about what we might take away from timing tells of quick calls?
Yeah, a quick call to me kind of means like I have a medium strength hand or a draw. I was never considering folding. I was never considering raising. If he had a set, if he had a big combo draw, he may think about raising here. So we go to the turn, which is another 5 now, and Bill quickly checks. Yeah. Now over to Brian, and in theory, I just kind of want to clarify, if the pre-flop raiser bets big on the flop, this is a great card for you to donk as the out-of-position player in Bill's shoes because you have way more 5x. If the in-position player takes a small size on the flop, not a great spot to donk because when they take a small size on the flop, they kind of say they're range betting. So they could be saying, hey, I'm betting ace 5, 5-6, 7-5 suited. So in that situation, the pre-flop raiser has just as much 5x as the out-of-position player. But when they bet big, they're just saying, hey, I have 10x or an overpair or a draw. That's the theory lens. From the what's actually going on in reality here lens.
Some would say more important, perhaps.
Yes. When Bill checks quickly on the turn, I wouldn't necessarily discount him from having 5x. Just because I don't necessarily see players who aren't very strong theory-oriented players even consider a donk here. A lot of players, when they make a 5 here, I think they're like, oh shit, I made trips. Let's check very quickly. So it looks like I don't have much, and then let's go for the check raise.
I think I've seen that before as well. When they have a very weak hand, often like to pretend they have a real decision, so they'll have a 10, 15, 20-second tank before they check, whereas when they make a full house, they make a flush, or they make trips, they quickly check to kind of insinuate that they're weak and hopefully induce a bet out of Brian in this situation.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. So let's talk about Brian's sizing.
The question I would ask myself here is, what's the largest size I can bet here that will still have 5x raise off, but that I will still be able to keep in pocket 6s, pocket 7s, a weak 10x, maybe even a 4x.
If you do get check raised here on this turn, we're most likely drawing to 2 outs.
Yeah, and it's not a difficult fold. When we have a hand that's got lots of equity, it really sucks to be blown off that. When we have a hand that has just a couple of outs versus the range that we think they have, well, folding is an easy and clear option, and we're actually only giving up a very small percentage of the pot, often 5%.
And a lot of people say, hey, how can you just fold kings if you get raised on this turn? Couldn't they have a draw? Well, sure, they could have a draw, but let's hold that coherent thread. Because the same type of player who would be super aggressive with a draw, wouldn't they be super aggressive with that draw on the flop? So if they wake up here on the turn and start raising, very unlikely to be a draw, because the guy who's going to be aggressive is going to be aggressive.
Most recreational players fall into 2 buckets, either much too passive or much too aggressive, and they have a real difficult time switching between both of those. So being passive on a flop and then aggressive on the turn. If they're going to be aggressive, it tends to start early and continue all the way through the hand.
So Brian here into 5,700. What's he going to do?
I think he's probably going to bet around 2/3 pot.
All right, so into 5,700. Look at that. You are, they call it, what is that called? Translucent?
Yeah, I am translucent.
Brian bets 4,000, and we see again Bill calls very, very quickly here on the turn. And I think this is almost more important than the flop here, because you would think here, if Bill did have a 5, he would at least consider raising.
Pretty tempting.
When they're so deep, right?
Yeah, that's
the board
such
is
a great
wet.
point.
The board is dynamic. They're super, super deep.
It's often in poker, there's big clues and little clues. And I think Mark's real strength is recognizing what are the big clues and what are the little clues and putting more weight on them. I think so often in poker, we see people go, oh, there's one piece of information in column A and one in column B. Therefore, it must be 50-50. Yeah. But so often, there's a clearly significant more value to one than the other. And the being able to determine which is how you're able to make these reads.
They call them little big clues. All right, so river is a 5, and now the hand goes off the rails a little bit, because now Bill is going to lead for 13,000, so almost pot here. He's going to lead, and now it's going to be back to Brian after Bill donks this river for a pot-sized bet. To me, this feels like either a busted draw or a 10. One of the things we see with rec players is they kind of value absolute strength over relative strength sometimes. And top full house here, pretty good hand. So if he did have a hand like Jack 10, Queen 10, I think that hand, if we think about, oh, he called very quickly on the flop with the 10, calls very quickly on the turn with the 10, improves to full house on the river, so now he leads, kind of makes sense, that story. Or a hand like a draw, like a busted flush draw. So I think those are kind of the two hands I would put squarely in his range. So the question I would have here in Brian's shoes is, well, if Bill has a flush draw or whatever, he's folding no matter what we do. Yeah. The question here is, can we get value from a hand like Jack 10 or Queen 10 if we raise?
This is where exploitative poker gets difficult, because I think there's arguments on either side. I think there's some players that if we made it $28,000, basically a min click, would roll their eyes and fold a 10. And there are a lot of recreational players who would beat us into the pot because they have top full house, and what are you going to do?
I think here I would be thinking, okay, I have the best hand here almost all the time. And I think I would want to go very, very small because I don't want to tend to fold. And Brian decides something else. He decides to go with a pretty chunky raise. He goes to 50K. This just seems a little bit thin. Brian goes 50K. Bill goes into the tank, and Bill decides that is not enough, and Bill goes all in.
Right. And this is where live poker is so fun. And this is where really strong live poker players, I think Brian for sure, the little spidey senses start to tingle and you start to wonder what the hell's happening. This is one of the most under-bluffed lines in poker. We don't see bluffs here, but this one feels a little bit off.
I kind of equate this to like the bank robber analogy that we sometimes talk about. Whereas you go into a bank, a guy's wearing a nice suit, a nice watch. You're like, this guy here, he's not going to rob a bank. And then all of a sudden you turn around and the guy's wearing a ski mask and pulls out a automatic machine gun. Like, well, your perceptions about that guy should change a little bit, right?
The suit is the small clue. The big clue is the ski mask and the assault rifle.
And when we walk through this hand, we're like, okay, Bill probably would at least think for a moment about raising 5x on the turn. But now when I see this river, first of all, when he donks pot on the river, Brian raises big, and then Bill 3-bet jams. This to me...
This is the automatic rifle, right? This is the ski mask and the automatic rifle. Everything before that was, well, he is wearing a nice watch, and those shoes do seem well shined.
If I'm Brian here, yes, there are some kind of spidey senses going, what the hell is this? But also at the same time, I've never seen anybody bluff this line ever before, and I think for me that kind of outweighs
it has to, right? You just have to say, hey, if this is a bluff, this is a bluff that I haven't seen before, and I suspect it's under-bluffed even if there are bluffs. And that's the real thing. We have a bluff catcher at this point.
Yes.
He's not jamming here with jacks with a 10x.
No, and I also don't think anybody's ever turning a 10 into a bluff, because that's insane as well, right? So like, it's just so hard to find the bluffs. Where are the bluffs? What is the bluff here?
Well, we may but yeah, I think when you see big clues and little clues, you have to lean into the big clues. Bet 3-bet when we don't beat value and we think he's under bluffing. All our bluff catchers are losing money, and I think the only responsible play is to make the fold.
Let's go for the reveal. Let's watch what happens on this river.
This would be a really amazing bluff. 10 out of 10.
I think Brian's going to fold it. I want to see what choice he has. The only thing you're thinking if you are Brian here is, would Bill raise off his trip fives on the turn on a wet board?
I fold only because I have no more money.
He does fold. And Bill shows him the bluff.
Damn, it feels good to be a gangster.